Did you know that back in the 1940s, there were cartoons produced by Warner Brothers that were considered classified documents produced in secret for the U.S. Army? You know, the same studio that brought you Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck? And you'll never guess the famous writer who scripted some of those cartoons. Hey guys, it's Rich from Rerun Zone. And you know, I'd love to dig up forgotten TV shows and cartoons. Well, today, I've got a doozy for you. You see, back in the 1940s, many of the major cartoon studios produced war propaganda cartoons. It helped keep the studios afloat during wartime. And the star of this chapter was a bumbling character named Private SNAFU. These were cartoons that were produced in secret, only to be seen by people in the armed forces during the war. These were no ordinary cartoons, though. They were classified government documents, a military secret. The Private SNAFU cartoons were designed to boost troop morale and teach soldiers about things like security, good hygiene, booby traps, and other military topics. They were to serve as examples of the negative consequences of doing things the wrong way. The series was called Private SNAFU for a reason. You see, the word snafu, S-N-A-F-U, was coined by the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II and is an acronym meaning situation normal, all fouled up. We're keeping it PG for now, but we all know what it really stands for, right? Walt Disney was given first crack to make the cartoons, but Disney wanted to own the character and the rights to merchandise. That's when Leon Schlesinger stepped in from Warner Brothers and underbid Disney by 2/3, and he got the job. These cartoons were produced in black and white to save money. The character of Private SNAFU was a walking, talking lesson in what not to do in the military. In fact, SNAFU did almost everything wrong, so basic lessons were learned from him about keeping secrets, avoiding getting sick, and following military rules. In the episode Private SNAFU vs. Malaria Mike, for example, he doesn't take his malaria medications or use insect repellent, and a mosquito gives him the disease ending in his death. In another, called Gas, he throws away his gas mask and is nearly killed with poison gas. The shorts were produced by such animation legends as Chuck Jones, Friz Freleng, and Bob Clampett. But what about the voice that brought Private SNAFU to life?
What's up, Doc?
Well, that credit goes to the legendary Mel Blanc, the man of 1,000 voices. Blanc was behind some of the most iconic characters in animation history, like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Porky Pig. There was also one famous writer that you would never guess in a million years that scripted many of these cartoons, but I'll get to that later in the video. For now, let's get right into the story of Private SNAFU. The year was 1943. The world was engulfed in war, and a committee led by Frank Capra, you know, the same Frank Capra that directed classic films like It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, decided to educate the troops in a most unexpected yet brilliant way imaginable. Instead of boring manuals or droning lectures, they used the world of cartoons. Now, these weren't just cartoons for entertainment. They served as instructional tools for the U.S. Army, teaching recruits what not to do while serving. These were not your average Saturday morning cartoons, though. They were an innovative approach to military training during the Second World War. The creators used simple language, racy illustrations, mild profanity, and subtle moralizing to convey important messages to the soldiers. It was about making learning fun, and it did so by using a unique brand of humor, one that was often dark but always effective. One of the most striking features of the series was its freedom from the constraints of the motion picture production code. This let the creators include some risque content which would have been unthinkable in other contemporary cartoons. The result was a series that felt authentic and unfiltered, a series that spoke the language of the soldiers that it was trying to educate. Maybe the most memorable part of the Private SNAFU cartoons was their darkly comic treatment of the characters' repeated deaths. Private SNAFU was the quintessential bumbling recruit, always doing things wrong and often paying the ultimate price for his mistakes. Each episode presented a new scenario where SNAFU's lack of discipline or understanding led to his downfall. But these tragic endings were always presented with a light touch, turning potential horror into humor. And with Mel Blanc voicing SNAFU,
well, at least up here.
you may hear some similarities to a certain wacky wabbit.
What's up, Doc?
This method not only made the show fun, but it also helped the troops remember the lessons it was trying to teach. Each tragic end served as a stark reminder of the consequences of not following rules and regulations and of not taking one's duties seriously. Through SNAFU's repeated blunders, the soldiers would learn vital lessons about the do's and don'ts of Army life, all in a lighthearted and engaging manner. The creators of these cartoons weren't just trying to make the soldiers laugh, they were trying to communicate important messages in a way that was easily digestible and memorable. But these cartoons weren't for the mass audience. The Army considered them secret documents. In order to keep the people who worked in the ink and paint department from figuring out what the story was about, they were only given 10 animation cells at a time. Private SNAFU cartoons were a military secret that were only allowed to be seen by people in the armed forces. Each cartoon took 6 weeks to make, and they were designated as official classified government documents. Staff were even required to be fingerprinted and were issued badges with FBI clearances. The shorts themselves didn't need to be approved, so they didn't have to follow the motion picture production code. The War Department had to approve the storyboards though for most of the Private SNAFU shorts, but the Warner directors were given a lot of freedom to make sure the cartoons were entertaining. But despite their humor, these cartoons were a serious military tool. SNAFU's stupidity actually leads to his death in 6 of the shorts, including Spies, Booby Traps, The Gold Brick, A Lecture on Camouflage, Private SNAFU vs. Malaria Mike, and Going Home. There was also another character featured in 9 of the shorts called Technical Fairy First Class. Picture a rough around the edges, cigar-smoking little G.I. Joe with fairy wings. He'd pop up to grant SNAFU's wishes, which usually involved cutting corners or skirting protocol. In one cartoon from 1944, Technical Fairy even turned SNAFU into a superhero named Snafuperman. But instead of saving the day, Snafuperman just ramped up the level of his careless antics, almost bombing Washington, D.C. instead of Berlin, Germany. All in all, 25 shorts were produced for the U.S. Army, with the 26th one, called Going Home, never released because of similarities to the bombing of Japan. A rumored 27th episode was also produced but never released, with the master being given to the U.S. Army. Now, what about the famous writer who wrote many of these episodes that I mentioned in the beginning? Well, his real name was Theodore Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss. That's right, the same Dr. Seuss who wrote The Cat in the Hat, Green Eggs and Ham, and How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And now that you know the story of Private SNAFU, all cartoons have since been declassified and are available to watch on either YouTube or at archive.org. If you enjoyed this episode, check out one of these other videos that also feature famous cartoons of the past. This is Rich from Rerun Zone. I'll see you next time.